early 2024, Kyiv signed 7 agreements with allied countries to ensure Ukraine's security in the next decade. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky's diplomatic advisor, Ukraine is negotiating 10 more such bilateral agreements. The biggest question is whether these agreements can prevent a prolonged frozen conflict and create the basis for Kyiv's victory in the conflict with Moscow. The security guarantees agreements include various military aid commitments for 2024 and beyond. Long-term commitments include cooperation in defense, humanitarian assistance. According to Max Bergman, director of the Europe, Russia, and Eurasia program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, the biggest disappointment is the lack of sustained military aid commitments beyond 2024 to send a strong message to Russia, and allows Ukraine and its allies to plan for the long term. These agreements reflect the divisions within NATO and the challenges that Ukraine and its allies are facing. For now, this is the best Ukraine can get, said Stefan Meister, head of the Eastern Europe program at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Aid budget. Each country has pledged a different amount to Ukraine by 2024, with Germany pledging the highest at €7.1 billion, $7.6 billion, while Denmark pledged more than any other country. Any other country if calculated as a percentage of GDP. The UK, Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark all set clear targets for military aid. Meanwhile, France pledged up to €3 billion, $3.2 billion. Canada's commitment of $3.02 billion includes macroeconomic and military support. Italy did not specify a specific number but agreed to maintain the same level of support as before, contributing just over $700 million in military aid from 2022. French military aid, considered lackluster by some allies, has been a constant source of tension, especially after President Emmanuel Macron's bold comments proposing to deploy troops to Ukraine. However, according to France's agreement with Ukraine, so far, the country has contributed €3.8 billion, $4.1 billion in military aid, a quite high number. Dr. Marie Dumoulin, a former French diplomat and expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations, agreed that previous estimates had underestimated French support. Paris has shipped a number of game-changing weapons to Ukraine, such as Scalp missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, and Caesar self-propelled guns. However, there is no agreement outlining exactly what kind of military aid the Allies intend to provide and whether this includes arms transfers, training, or direct cash assistance. Expert Bergman admitted that he was disappointed by the lack of long-term financial commitments from allies to make it easier for the parties to plan. He said, when America commits, for example, $1 billion a year to Israel to buy the F-35, this gives stability to everyone, including Lockheed, the manufacturer, knowing that they will receive that money and can invest it in the future. Transatlantic tensions. Future uncertainty is the driving factor behind the deals. To date, the United States has provided nearly half of all military aid to Ukraine, including some of the most effective weapons, from the Javelin anti-tank system to the HIMARS high-mobility artillery rocket system. In addition to short-term commitments to spend on ammunition and bombs to meet urgent needs on the front lines, all 7 agreements emphasize the development of the European defense industry, including in Ukraine. According to Mr. Bergman, the bill to support Ukraine, proposed by U.S. President Joe Biden in October 2023 and stalled in Congress since then, is a wake-up call for European countries. Expert Bergman said that the EU has the ability to produce more, but has started too late and is progressing slowly. Speaking from across the Atlantic, expert Stefan Meister said that one day Europe could stand alone. A long street. The main message the agreements send, to both Kyiv and Moscow, is that Ukraine's allies are committed to the long term over the next decade. Most experts agree on the content of the message, but seem less convinced about its power. Dumoulin, whose experience negotiating the Minsk ceasefire agreements between Ukraine and Russia in 2014 to 2015 gave her unique insight into Russian diplomatic thinking, said these agreements were very important in dashing Moscow's hopes of victory by dividing the West. After the failure of Ukraine's counteroffensive in the summer of 2023 and the fraying of unity between the Allies, many fear that the coming years will bring a freeze in conflict, or worse, a dramatic shift in the balance of power favors Russia. Ambassador William Courtney, a former U.S. diplomat and senior fellow at the nonprofit think tank RAND, drew tentative comparisons with the final years of the Soviet war in Afghanistan. In 1989, Soviet forces seemed to have the upper hand in Afghanistan. Just 2 years later, the Soviet Union no longer existed, he said. The basis for experts' optimism is that Kyiv and its allies can turn the long-term conflict to Ukraine's advantage on the assumption that strong, stable Western support is a necessary condition for success. This work. No single development, military or political, can end hostilities immediately. While Mr. Courtney is optimistic about the upcoming arrival of F-16 fighter jets and the possible integration of NATO's Airborne Early Warning and Control System, AWACS, other analysts are skeptical. Appeared more skeptical. Similarly, 2024 will see elections around the globe, testing Allied support for Ukraine. Experts agree that Ukraine can break the deadlock to its advantage. As long as the security agreements are just the beginning of a framework of meaningful military cooperation for the next decade and beyond.